Thank you, Andreas, and thanks to you all. Good morning. I was thinking that maybe it's Natalie that we need to moderate in terms of fines. No, it's a joke. It's a joke because, in fact, what it is not a joke is that I'm very happy to be here today. It is not what we expected. This gathering used to take place every 2 years, and of course the world is not the same. But the world that you left when you met in 2024, and probably, as we are all aware, it's not even the same that the world that existed when you started to think how to organize this gathering this year, not even 10 days ago. And well, things may happen at a high speed, but we need to be ready to afford whatever it is. And yes, we know that what we are witnessing is not only blood and suffering. The economy, the energy markets have reacted instantly. Gas prices jumped sharply. Oil benchmarks climbed again. And there is this uncertainty floating in the air. And many people in our societies, of course, governments, corporates, wondering how this may evolve and to what extent this could impact them. It is not new. We have seen this before. Yes, we know that geopolitical tensions translate immediately into the market, and higher bills, inflationary pressure, uncertainty for business are things that are not good for anyone. And that puts back pressure on the competition authorities and, of course, among the business players. So we ask ourselves what this means for us. What does this mean for the competition community? How we can help to prevent additional damage? The deep transformation of our energy systems is a must, that we knew. It is a must in terms of competitiveness, in terms of affordability, so impacting directly in the whole economy. But it may be the case that it is also something relevant in terms of targeted emergency support that could be needed in this context if tensions continue. So I could come with a simple statement. Our direction of travel is clear, and an energy-independent and decarbonized European Union is key. Sticking to the general framing is important to ensure that reliability keeps in place and investors feel like taking the decisions to bet in our economy, and households feel that they can support this deep transformation. It is also a truth in terms of economic security, not to have weakness connected to dependencies from abroad that go beyond certain limits, thresholds. And yes, it is obvious that it is not only something that turns back or connects back to the economy, it is also things that matter to our citizens. And this was the reason why we came up with proposals last Tuesday in Strasbourg along the lines of what we knew we had to do. But in this turbulent context, the question is how we can ensure a smart and meaningful transformation while addressing at the very same time a crisis and not forgetting one of the very core reasons why we exist, which is to prevent distortions in the single market. What type of support measures to address emergencies? What longer-term measures to transform deeply our economy and make it more resilient? And how we can avoid distortions. We are not there, but in case this arrives, we need to draw from the experience of the previous crisis. For the moment, we have untapped state aid possibilities that member states can still use to give relief to electricity prices of energy-intensive users. And in that context, we cannot forget the core DNA of antitrust regulators and enforcers to ensure the level playing field, to prevent excessive market power and abuses of dominant positions, and to protect consumers and players in any given market. Europe has gone through several crises in the last few years. It has been hard on citizens and companies, but as I said, we can draw the experience from the previous recent crisis. 2020-2022, we were confronted with the COVID pandemic, then with the Russian aggression against Ukraine, and these events hit citizens and our societies very hard, and the Commission reacted on several fronts. One key item that we did is that for each of these two crises, we adopted the COVID temporary framework and the temporary crisis framework. In both cases, we had to react quickly, and we enabled public support to business in need in order to preserve jobs and avoid that otherwise healthy companies were brought down. In both cases, we adopted the temporary frameworks within a few weeks, enabling member states to provide necessary support while protecting the integrity of the single market. We also wanted to let companies and the private sector do their most to respond to the acute challenges of this crisis, and we signaled that we welcome cooperation that would ensure the supply and fair distribution of scarce products to all consumers. In fact, all competition authorities came together and issued a joint statement by the European Competition Network. They said, "We made clear that such cooperation measures were unlikely to be problematic under competition rules. And in case companies had doubts, we invited them to reach out to the Commission, the EFTA Surveillance Authority, or a national authority at any time for informal guidance." And it was pretty helpful. But beyond crisis measures and our ability to react in emergencies, the world we live in today is not the same as the world we lived in a decade ago. That is why I was tasked with modernizing the competition rulebook to ensure that our rules are fit for purpose. And that is what we are trying to do with your help, with your ideas, and with your experience. Allow me to comment on a few topics that have been in the agenda in these months. Sustainability as a key driver for competitiveness. Governments willing to favor this quick transformation of the economy performance. The first big deliverable in the modernization agenda under this mandate was to adopt the Clean Industrial State Aid Framework in June 2025, following the Clean Industrial Deal and the Competitiveness Compass. Why? Because we know sustainability and deep transformation of our industrial competitiveness require speedy changes, and member states were willing to accelerate that change. And maybe markets were not ready to fix this issue at the high speed that things are happening. And this framework provides a stable framework for member states to support our decarbonization, keeping under control any risk in terms of market fragmentation. It facilitates and accelerates investments that could modernize our economy and make it more competitive and resilient. At this time, we have approved aid for around 23 billion euros through a scheme supporting renewables deployment and decarbonization of our industry. The tools reduce our dependency on volatile fossil fuels and contributes to affordable energy prices in the medium term. Along the lines, the direction of travel that we learned in the previous crisis was going to be important. This framework becomes even more relevant today. It was designed to support the transformation, but is it fit for providing answers to deep increases in energy prices in an emergency context? I'm sure that this is a discussion that we will be having if the current crisis stays too long with us. Importantly, CSAF also allows to give short-term relief to the electricity bill of energy-intensive users, so ensuring that the deep transformation of the economy does not have negative impacts in the transitional times. But if counting on any type of support, it should be transparent, fair, or under the rules of competition. This is an important tool that can help transition to a more decarbonized energy mix and help the industry with high electricity price in the very short term while ensuring their transformation. And it is not the only thing that we have done. We also adopted revised ETS stated guidelines, emission trading scheme guidelines on how to use the revenues to ensure that those sectors being particularly affected could count on some return to facilitate to cover the cost of indirect carbon intensity embedded in the electricity systems. We extended the number of sectors that can benefit from this support and increased the aid intensity up to 80% for the most energy-intensive sectors. This is an additional tool for member states to temporarily help the industry. It was adopted before Christmas. No member state has yet made use of that. But let's not lose sight of the medium-term goal. Industry is key for prosperity and the creation of wealth as much as high-quality, clean transport for citizens. This is why we will be adopting guidelines on a block exemption regulation to help steer public finance to sustainable modes of transportation. With our rules, we want to ensure that member states, regions transition faster to rail and water transport and to enable investments into modern transportation infrastructures, fleet renewal, digitalization, and interoperability. Again, ensuring that we count on a common, predictable, and transparent framework. As mentioned before, responding to change relies not only on public intervention, it needs to rely mainly on the private initiative. And there are many different players willing to bet on sustainability. This is why we took note of their demand to support cooperation between companies, in particular where they genuinely want to contribute to sustainability and understand that cooperativeness can help to a greater success. In July 2025, we issued a first informal guidance letter on a sustainability agreement. This guidance served to support port terminal operators for jointly purchasing and setting technical specifications for certain container handling equipment, thereby accelerating the shift from diesel to electric equipment. I hope that many took advantage of that and contributed to reducing CO2 emissions and ensure the resilience. We are mindful that cooperation can also increase resilience. The Commission has been carrying out a fact-finding exercise on the need and means for greater industry cooperation in procurement, recycling, and the reuse of critical raw materials. And we are assessing the feedback that we have received. As a general matter, our doors are wide open to such initiatives, and where relevant, we are ready to provide individual guidance. It is not only about new forms of cooperation, it is also about new areas for enforcement. This means looking into emerging and fast-moving markets, including artificial intelligence, where competition policy is already being tested in very concrete ways. AI challenges some of our traditional assumptions. At its best, AI can improve the daily lives of citizens, accelerate innovation, and supercharge productivity of our industries, economies, and use of the infrastructures. But at its worst, it can entrench corporate power concentration, undermine media plurality, and our creative communities. It can create real dangers for our children, our democracy, We saw this risk clearly with the recent issues around AI-generated deepfake images. AI as such is not where the problem lies. Questions arise in relation to who controls the key inputs: data, computing capacity, cloud services. Access to users increasingly shape market outcomes. This is why we are looking at the entire AI stack. Not only the final applications, like ChatGPT, but also on underlying models that power them. The data the models are trained on, and the cloud infrastructure and energy sources are their foundation. Effective competition all along these supply chains is essential to ensure that AI-driven markets do not tip irreversibly. This requires vigilance and fast and decisive enforcement where needed. In September 2024, we set our potential competition risk in an AI policy brief. We are now seeing some risk emerge in practice. One risk concerns exclusion from key distribution channels to reach users, where dominant platforms favor their own AI services on their own channels. Rivals may be excluded before the markets mature. This logic underpins our ongoing proceedings concerning Meta and WhatsApp. We cannot allow big tech players to leverage their dominance of the past to dictate which AI services European citizens can access, or who gets to bring innovation to the market. We were concerned that Meta's ban on third-party AI assistant from accessing WhatsApp could cause irreparable harm to that rapidly evolving market, and we were not the only national competition authority feeling the fear. This is why we have been working to quickly impose interim measures. This is why we may think about interim measures differently. We issued a statement of objections in February. Last week, Meta announced that it could reverse its decision to exclude third-party AI chatbots from WhatsApp. But it will start charging a fee, as they have done in one member state already. This shows the importance of our swift enforcement steps. We are now carefully assessing if this policy change has an impact on the need for the Commission to act urgently. And sometimes our analysis and experience tell us that competition policy requires new instruments. Our findings on fast-moving digital markets inform the Digital Markets Act. Across these markets, the challenge is consistent. DMA is clearly the enforcement priority for me. We have opened a number of new cases in this mandate. For instance, 3 cloud cases, Google spam policy, 2 Google specification proceedings. Further, while we welcome global competition in the internal market, we do not want this competition to be shaped by subsidies. This is why we adopted the Foreign Subsidies Regulation, closing a regulatory gap. Member State subsidies were always subject to close scrutiny under state aid control. Thanks to the Foreign Subsidies Regulation, subsidies granted by non-European governments no longer go unchecked. And still, it's challenging. The Foreign Subsidies Regulation ensures a level playing field in the single market. It keeps Europe open for business, but we need to protect competition on the merits. Both the DMA and the FSR are undergoing a review this year. We conducted public consultations last year, and these are feeding into our work. The review reports are due in May and July, respectively. And since we are talking about the review, perhaps some of the audience is particularly interested on the most famous review of the decade, the new merger guidelines. Merger guidelines that intend to contribute to strengthening Europe's competitiveness. We want to help European companies to scale up in a pro-competitive way to support growth and unlock greater investments in Europe. But at the very same time, we know that the core objective of merger control is there to remain. Excessive consolidation weakens incentives to compete and invest. Mergers should not undermine choice and affordability for business and citizens. Still, a new theme of the guidelines will be that merger control has a role to play in ensuring a single market that is resilient to serious shocks. This is increasingly important in the world of today. Our new guidelines will help companies understand when a merger can be good for resilience or whether it may be a little bit more riskier. This could particularly be the case in global markets defined by dominant non-EU suppliers. A merger can enable a European alternative or increases European firms' negotiating power towards non-European suppliers. But mergers can harm resilience. Where they reduce the number of suitable suppliers of critical inputs, resilience can be at risk. Because resilience comes from diverse markets, from open supply chains that absorb shocks, from multi-sourcing possibilities, merger control avoids choke points that can be breaking points. Another key element of the review is a more robust treatment of dynamic effects, both dynamic harm and dynamic efficiencies. Innovation and investment matter for competitiveness. They will feature prominently in our assessment. The guidelines will enable a more forward-looking analysis across all types of mergers. After 20 years, we are modernizing the merger guidelines to make them fit for the future. We will publish draft guidelines in the coming weeks, and we are looking forward to your contributions. In short, in addressing the challenges that we face, we look at all ways competition policy can play a role and support broader goals. Because power, market, democracies, innovation have always connected and connect more than ever today to the competition policy. Yet, there are limits. The merger guidelines can lay out pro-competitive scale to be found, for instance, in cross-border mergers and antitrust. And competitive assessments can account for non-price parameters such as quality and sustainability. But we cannot engage in wishful thinking. We must be cautious with using labels like global market, out-of-market efficiencies. Of course, they count. But we don't want to force competition authorities into imagining competitors that do not exist, or into brokering trade-offs that they are not equipped to make. Put it differently, competition policy must reach out, but it cannot overreach. In particular, the merger guidelines cannot create a single market. This is why the Commission is working on a One Europe, One Market roadmap. Market integration may be the right answer for some of the problems, some of the issues being raised in recent months. Similarly, the Commission recently adopted a proposal on an Industrial Accelerator Act, intending to increase demand for low-carbon, European-made technologies and products, including clean technologies. Competition enforcement can complement political priorities, but parliaments decide on political priorities and trade-offs. So in these uncertain geopolitical times, I wish for competition policy that we know is principled, that we work to modernize, and that we acknowledge is very relevant, very relevant. We can do a lot, but it is complementary. Thanks a lot, and I count on you.
Yes, hello, good morning. Also from my side, first of all, thank you very much, Andreas, for inviting me to speak today. I can only take this occasion to thank you for the great partnership we have between the Austrian authority and the German one, and it's wonderful to be able to also have short calls regarding policy questions, and it's really inspiring. So thank you very much, and it's a particular honor that you've asked me today to interview one of the global leaders in not only, but also competition enforcement and policy at the European level. Teresa, wonderful to have you here. So let's dig a bit deeper into the burning issues, specifically from the perspective of a national competition authority. A lot of my peers are here today from the national competition authorities. You already mentioned we live in a time of crisis. At the moment, we see everyday new developments in the Middle East. We see that petrol prices are spiking. I can only say from an Austrian perspective, as a national authority, I've been called, I've been asked for expertise by regional government, by our federal government. We're trying to advise with our market knowledge. But there have been calls for price caps, for regulation, for tougher competition enforcement, the call for quick fix for the problems we see in the markets. So in the current context, what's your take? What is the role of competition authorities, also national competition authorities? What can our contribution be?
No, thanks a lot for the question. Allow me to start by saying something that I have already shared in other public events. I remember very well my predecessor, Margaret Vestager, telling me, try to get rid of all these things. And unluckily, I think that that won't be the case in the near future, because I think that we are also committed to a well-functioning society, and during crisis, society expects from us to help, to support the answers that may come from governments, and it is important that they take place as rightly as possible, if I may say, and as least distortive as possible. So yes, I think that the good news is that unhappily we have learned a lot from the previous crisis, and now we know much better how we can be more effective and less distortive. And in certain cases, it may go along traditional ways to use taxation or to facilitate direct support to households or direct help to business. And in certain cases, we may need to identify targeted creative solutions. And it is still a little bit too early to know how this may evolve, because we expect that things do not degrade much, but we don't know, and we expect that the leaders at the European Council do agree on how to handle this and to what extent there is deep coordination between the European layer and the member states' capacities. What I would say is that whatever it is, it could be good that it preserves at least three main principles. The first of them is that we know that we are in the middle of a deep transformation of our economic model, and that security, resilience, affordability, competitiveness go along this deep transformation of our energy model. So we cannot derail the long-term signals. The carbon pricing, the functioning of the markets, any change in this, any derail in these long-term signals could lower the speed of change, will create uncertainty, and good second principle, crowd out investors. We know that the transformation requires much investment. We know that we have come up with a proposal on what is the type of economic model that we want to put in place. And we know, we have said it on many occasions, even more in the last year, that reliability, predictability, certainty, respect of the rule of law are key elements to offer to our investors and the business community. So we need to prevent jeopardizing, crowding out investors. So it needs to be consistent, no pendular swings in the regulation. And the third thing that we know is that we should prevent market fragmentation. This was why I was explaining a little bit and getting a little bit detail on why it was important to count on this clean industrial state aid framework, why it is important to count on common guidelines on how to compensate the direct cost of carbon for industries, because if at least we can count on this common framework, we know what we are talking about and we prevent 27 different solutions, and that is good. The main point is that if we don't want to derail long-term signals, if we want to count on predictability, but we are confronting an intense shock, we may need to preserve, to the extent possible, existing structural regulations and to think how to tweak within the existing framework, how to come to support citizens and industries. And this means turning back on what are the lessons being drawn from the previous crisis and how subsidies, state aid, creative manners, in a context where fiscal space may differ, but need to be fair, can come to support citizens. And that's what we are trying to do, together with different services in the Commission, working with our colleagues in DG Energy, DG Climate, DG TaxSud, and of course DG Competition, how we can foresee what experience saw us from the previous crisis and how we can do that. And of course it could be good to have a chance not only to speak to governments but also to national competition authorities to ensure that we are on the same page.
Thank you. You already mentioned how important it is to have consistent answers also towards the business community, and you also highlighted that we need to hinder any kind of market fragmentation in the European market. I mean, in my view, within competition law and enforcement, the European Competition Network has been an important cornerstone in that sense, ensuring consistency, and it's quite a unique feature of Europe that we have this very evolved network with far-reaching possibility to cooperate. I think it has helped consumers and especially SMEs across Europe with competition enforcement measures. So in the current context, do you see any specific role of for cooperation? Do we need to deepen cooperation? Do we have to evolve the network? From the Commission perspective on the network, where do you see us going?
Yes, I think that it is not only quite unique, but also quite successful. So I think that we need to keep on deepening into this success and to identify where the new challenges may be, either because it is an urgent and compelling need, or because in the most structural, difficult challenges, we need to have common views and to avoid getting into different solutions that may create some reluctancy or difficulties for corporates to understand. So yes, I think that we need to make full use of this network, and my sense is that in fact people feel quite committed and engaged in this approach. And we have seen it with some of the most challenging new sectors and regulations. And I think that now more than ever, because of the previous experience that has been very recent but very intense, it would be very important to activate and to energize this network. So for those peers being in the room, be ready, because we may have to work intensively together in the coming weeks.
We're ready, I think. So I think you've already shared and elaborated what the long-term goals are in your view that the EU and member states should also not lose sight of and focus on. Of course, in times of economic crisis, an issue that's always at the forefront of discussion. And I have to say, I'm sometimes quite happy that as a national authority, at least in Austria, I don't have to deal with it. That is state aid. Yeah, the issue of state aid. Maybe more specifically, do you see a need to reform If yes, where? You already mentioned the clean industrial deal. Do you feel in the current context, does it need to be adapted? Maybe what are your views on that?
I mean, it is too early to have an answer, but it is something that we need to pay attention to. The clean industrial estate framework is connected to the structural change within its limits, conditionalities, and I think that it is, I'm proud of that. I think that it is quite forward-looking, and I think that, that it provides sufficient and solid grounds to facilitate for those willing to support the transformation of their business, options that could not distort and that are flexible enough to be effective and ready to be adopted, so quick enough to have an early reaction. The question is that they were not designed for emergency cases. So do we need to think about an emergency chapter? It may be. Because, as you know, I've been in charge of energy in the previous crisis, and you can understand very well that if things worsen so much that families cannot afford the energy bill, business need to close down, there may be not very nice behaviors coming from some energy companies breaking contracts and entering into new proposals, raising prices and getting additional windfall profits or whatever. Governments will not stay without doing nothing. Whatever the European regulation may say, they will feel that they need to respond. So it is much better to count on a common framework and to be clear and fair on how we can identify national measures that are similar in the 27 national states. That doesn't mean everybody doing the same, but at least counting on a common menu could help. Mm-hmm. So, as I said, it's still too early to respond to your question because we will be having this meeting of the leaders next week, but I'm sure that a meeting that was conceived to discuss competitiveness, counting on the presence of the Secretary General of the United Nations, so competitiveness and tensions in the global landscape will also address the impact on prices, on inflation, on affordability. Mm-hmm. In the current crisis, and I'm sure that we will get, and it is not only their privilege, it is their responsibility, their duty, to come up with some orientation on how they would like to prepare an answer. But most probably, they may say something on why and how it could be good to mm-hmm. count on a common approach. Mm-hmm. coming or being proposed from the Commission. So we need to be ready, and it could be good to count on the national competition authorities to be sure that we reflect a common and compatible approach.
Thanks for sharing that. So maybe just, just one, I think your keynote and also now your dialogue showed that you're really in the eye of the storm of so many issues, and lots of people come and ask something from you and they want you to do this or that. So here is the European elite of competition law and policy today. Is there anything you would wish from this community for your work?
Be creative, mindful, helpful.
Hear that?
And we will pick your brains, because we will need your brains and your energy to remind ourselves that we are at the service of the society, and that we need to think together how we can face whatever challenge in an united and positive way. So I count on you. We count on you.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Thank you.